Okay. We've been talking about the 60s and 70s and want to get into the 80s now, and the 80s and 90s. And if the 60s and 70s were a period of change and pretty chaotic, we were adding women to the program. We were going through the civil rights business during that period. There were all kinds of changes going on, realignment of conferences and so forth. So it was, the 60s and 70s were kind of a readjustment period where colleges and universities were trying to find their way in both at the national level and the conference level. The 80s and 90s for us at Doane was probably characterized best by our becoming a regional power, people starting to recognize the fact that we had a pretty good program at the regional level, and that we, furthermore, were a force to be dealt with on the national level. And I think that that was is a pretty accurate description of this time frame for our track and field program. Now it all started back in the 1978 era with our men's team, getting third in the NCAA championship. But you know, really, it was exciting and all that. But really, you know, we did that with 4 or 5 guys. Cotton won the vault, and Fred Wilson won the 800. We got second in the 4x100 relay with Cotton and Ricky Hadnot and Mike Sales and Tom Areta. And that was 28 points, and that was good enough for third. It was one of those meets where it was just, there was a jillion schools that scored, and they split the points all up, and so I think 35 points won the meet. Well, now you can score 35 points in the national meet, you wouldn't get in the top 10. And surely 28 wouldn't get you anything, and so it was really a weird kind of thing. We didn't even realize we were in the thing till they announced it. I couldn't believe that 28 points was going to get you anything. But that was our first, in 1978, that was our first exposure on the national level. And it was a precursor, I think, of things to come. Although it may not have been really evident at that point in time. We're starting to get pretty competitive at the conference level. And we have a picture there, that 1980s team where we won both the men's and the women's indoor and the men's outdoor. We won 3 out of the 4 possible championships. And, you know, that's not easy to do. Somebody asked me, well, when are you going to sweep all 4? And if you look at our conference, I think the only time that's been done is maybe about the last 2 or 3 years. Coach Fi's team has done that. And to win all 4 in a conference meet is a really important, that's heavy duty. And we won 3 out of 4 a number of times, but to get all 4, you got to be pretty lucky, to be honest with you. But we did. We were able to establish ourselves, I think, in the early '80s as a team to be reckoned with on the conference level. That we were pretty well. Starting to control the track and field conference at the conference level. Although Wesleyan had a great track program at that time, Woody Greeno was their coach, and he's a really good track coach. They had a nice program. They beat us probably more times than we beat them in the 80s. And we started out really well in 81, 82, in the first part of that, and then kind of tailed off. It's kind of interesting to look at over the years, the men's and women's championship and what schools have won what. And it's very, very difficult to have a quality men's team and a quality women's team at the same time. You're going to have one or the other. The 80s, our men were pretty much dominant in track and field, and our women were just they would show it all. And the big deal with that was that they were second in every one of those. They were running against a Midland team that was very, very good. They had won the national championship, I think, twice during that time frame. And so we're battling against these people that are really, really pretty good. And it doesn't show in the conference results. I think that the 80s really was a decade of the runner. We had some good field people at that juncture, but the bulk of our success was in the running events, and we had a good 10-year period. In the 80s, we won 12 men's conference championships and 2 women's, and we were really blessed with some really, really good kids. I mean, these were high quality people, and many of them performances stand today. What's that? 35 years later, as records. I don't like getting into individuals and that kind of thing, because we're judging one of individual against another. But I think some of the people that were really should be recognized. I think Steve Durr was our first 7-foot high jumper. And he was only our second flopper. Up until that time, we'd had some really pretty good high jumpers. Craig Fleming and Pat Phillips were both roll jumpers, and kind of an old-fashioned kind of deal. And then Vic McGuire came on, was our first flop jumper as a transfer from a junior college in Illinois. And he was a 6'10" jumper. And we had 3 or 4 6'10" jumpers at that time. And Durr came from Lyman, Nebraska, way out on the West Coast. And he was a hurdler high jumper, and a good one. And finally made 7 foot. That first time a Doan jumper had ever made 7 foot. And of course, Cotton, Rick, was our outdoor indoor and outdoor record holders in the pole vault. And the one record is still in effect 35 years later. The other one was broken this last year. And he was the first Nebraska native to clear 16 feet in the pole vault. And So that, all classes, whatever. And then we started, I think the thing really got going in 19, heck would that be? 81 or 2. We won the national indoor 2-mile relay. John Cox and Brian Cummins and Shane Peterson and somebody else, I can't tell you. Dan Riley ran 7:37 indoors on a 10 lap to the mile bank board track in the municipal auditorium, and that was tough. I mean, you put 8 teams on the track and in a 6-lane track, bank boards elevated, and it gets to be a pretty physical. You talk about physical contact. It's a contact sport in that. And they won that pretty easily. It was one of my highlights as a coach. Came that day. We were in a pretty good battle with Prairie View A&M from Texas, and we beat them. And I came back up to I went down to the track, and I came back up to where we were sitting, and happened to run across the Prairie View coach, Hoover Wright, and Hoover said, "Congratulations, you guys ran great." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, he said, "I always tell my boys, when they see that orange and black team, they better get ready, because the Doan comes to run." And that was really for me, that was, as a coach, that was really, I thought, a real compliment. Anyway, that record still stands today, and that was a heck of a run. And those were good kids. They ran very, very well. And our first real good shot putter, female shot putter, Connie Hugan from Gordon, Nebraska, and Rushville, one of those. We were very fortunate to recruit her. Dunnigan and I made a road trip all the way out there just to see her and talk to her parents into sending her here. And she almost left the first week. We had to sweet talk her into staying. But she was a really good putter. And, she threw 51 feet. That's our school record. And that 35 years ago, it didn't have some of the things that we have today. Just barely starting to get our feet on the ground. And then, kid, probably the really best track and field athlete, I think, that we have ever had here. A kid named Greg Larson from Malcolm, Nebraska. Greg was a high school 800-meter runner and quarter-miler, and he was the best competitive runner I think I have ever coached. The guy was never going to run second to anybody. If you were going to beat him, he was going to drop dead on the spot, I think. He got beat a few times, but not very many. Won 2 national championships. Holds our school record in the 800 in 149 and change. And but it wasn't the time necessarily that he ran to win, but the way he did it. And his sophomore year, he got 4th or 5th, I think, in the 800 as a freshman. And then as a sophomore, into the national meet. He takes off in the final. I don't even know how. I think he probably won his qualifying heat, but in the final heat, he takes off. He runs 49 flat for the first 400 meters, and he's 40 yards ahead, and you can just see these people. And in fact, I overheard a couple of coaches sit down behind us. Oh boy, that Doan guy's going to die on his backside. And he never did. He just kept plugging and plugging and plugging. And by the time they got to the 150 meters to go, you could see the face of some of those runners, and this guy's not coming back to us. And Greg, that's just the way he attacked everything. I don't think he ever ran second to anybody in a practice session. If you wanted to lead a practice session, you better be ready to go, because he was going to make you hump. Greg was, I really just enjoyed the way he ran, and he trained like a maniac. I mean, this guy he was tough, exceptional competitor, and could run. He wasn't much for running long, but he could turn it over. I think the picture there that you have is as part of an NAIA international team that I was fortunate enough to coach in 1985 maybe, and we went to France and competed in the French National Collegiate Championships as a guest team, and Lars ran both the 400 and the 800 in on that trip, and he was a great runner and a great kid to deal with. Sean Wheelock, another one that was a great runner for us, another great competitor. He was a lot like Larson. He was tougher than a boot, but he could run up. He was on our cross-country team, and he was one of our better cross-country guys, and could run the mile, 1,500 meters, and 800. He ran. Although nobody probably knew it or knows it, he ran one of the three guys that we had that ran sub 150 for 800 meters, and but we elected to run him in the 1,500 in the national, and he got second in the national meet, and 3:49 change. And that still stands as a record today, 35 years later, or whatever, 30 years later. Fritz Bush, another kid that we had that was a Lincoln Pius kid, that was a steeplechaser for us. Fritzy was probably the slowest guy to ever place in a national meet. This guy couldn't hardly break 60 for a quarter. In fact, we took a girls 4x100 relay out and let them run against him to try and get him to break 60 in the 400, or in the 400, and but he had a marvelous sense of pace, and he 9:14, a pretty good steeplechase. That's a pretty good mark, and again, another one that still stands today. Fritz was a good cross-country runner for us, and probably, the best steeplechaser we've had for forever. And and he was I think he got third or fourth in the national meet with that. And Kevin Henning, local kid here from Crete, and in the jumped 24.6 in the long jump, and that was a record that was broken this year by Wilkin, and so that was at that time was a really high quality mark, and Kevin was just really kind of another guy, and just when we got him in Crete High, he had some tools. He could run a little bit. He ran on a short relay team, and but his big thing was his jumping ability. He could get up off the ground, and he could compete. And Cotton, his outdoor record was broken this year, right? And by Andy Tatum, and so that record lasted for 30 plus years. And if you get a record that lasts for over 30 years, it's got to be pretty good. And so we were getting some marks then that would be good today. And given the change of facilities and equipment between then and now and over a 30-year period, that's pretty significant, I think. And Kathy Wagner was another one. Kath was is a school record holder, 209 in the 800. And she was from Central City, Nebraska. Was a sprinter in high school, 100 and 200 runner. And we moved her up as a freshman to the 400, and she placed in the national meet, and I can't tell you, probably 5th or 6th or 7th or something. And she came down to the hotel after the meet, and we were sitting around, and she came in and she said, "Coach, can I talk to you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, What do I have to do to be an 800-meter runner?" And I said, "Well, Kath, you've already exceeded what we had expected out of you as a freshman in the 400. And she said, "Yeah, but I want to win. And I don't have the running speed to beat these other girls at 400. She said, "What do I have to do to be an 800-meter runner?" I said, "Well," I said, "probably ought to try running a little cross country and just for a base, see how that goes." And she said, "Well, what are the cross country runners doing this summer?" And I told her, and she said, "Okay." And she said, "Do you mind if I take a week or two off?" I said, "No, you can take a month off if you want. I don't care." Because we'd had kind of a long season. And I said, "Well, why do you want to take the time off?" And she said, "Well," and she's getting really defensive now. And she said, "Well, my doctor wanted me to take some time off." I said, "Well, why?" She said, "Well, I've had a stress fracture since the middle of April. This is the end of May." And she'd been running a month and a half on a stress fracture, and nobody ever knew it. She never limped a step. She wouldn't say a word to anybody about it. And I said, "Yeah, go ahead and take time off." Well, long story short, Kathy wound up being an All-American in both cross country and track and field. And her 209, that is a really high quality 800-meter mark. And there's a lot of people that have tried to break that, and that might be the best quality mark of any that we have on the books. If you look at what it takes, to place today. Connie Hugan, again, she had the outdoor mark, was just tied this year. Carly Henry, just tied that mark this spring, 49.10 or whatever. and so that was, Hugon was a person that very few people either remember or appreciated, I think. She was a kind of really laid back kind of kid and didn't make a big production out of anything. Just went about her business and did her job and as the best she could, and her best was pretty good. And Dunnigan did a really good job coaching her. And she was pretty crude coming out of Gordon, Rushville, whatever. He really worked at refining her skills and really helped her to be a really good shot putter, discus thrower, weight person. Amy Baker Amy was our first female national champion. And the story with her was she's from Denver, and she ran for John Green, one of our old runners, and at Aurora Central High School. And John called me one day about her, and I said, okay, I'm going to come out to Denver and meet with some of your kids and so forth. So we did. I went out there and met with a room full of kids and had pizzas and tried to convince them to come to Doane. Anyway, later on, this is like in November or so, and John said, now, Amy never has won for us, but you can't go wrong with her. She's a brilliant student, and she's just a really good runner and solid kid. Okay, and so Esther and I were flying down to Houston at Christmas time to see our kids, and I called Amy on the telephone and visited with her a little bit. She said, well, my mom and I would like to talk to you. I said, well, we have a layover in Denver at Stapleton Airport, going down to Houston next week or this week or whatever. And she said, well, could I meet you at the airport? And so and she did. And so actually I recruited her at the airport. We're on a layover between two planes, and she came to Doane. Never won a race for us, ever. Any kind of race, 4 years at school, till the district meet her senior year in college, and she won the 10K it was up at Wayne, Nebraska, at Wayne State, was in the NAIA then, and she won the 10K, and then we put her had her run the marathon in the national meet, and she won it. She won 2 races over her entire career, junior high, senior high, college, all those years. And she wins 2 races, and they're the last 2 that she runs. And just a beautiful kid. She went on, got a doctor of veterinary medicine degree from Colorado State. And is a veterinarian up around O'Neill, just south of O'Neill. And has been almost from the day she left college. Just a great kid. Got as much out of, she's an example, I think, of a couple of things that I think are kind of important on a college level. Getting the most out of whatever talent you got. Maximizing talent, maximizing your ability. And that, as a coach, I always felt that being able to maximize was about all you could expect. You aren't going to win every race. And if you want to run fast times, you got to have fast people. And that's that simple. And if you don't, then the best you can hope for is to maximize what you do have. And if you can do that, then you're doing a pretty decent job as a coach. And Amy was a really good example. There are a couple of others later on in the 90s that were similar, maybe even a bigger surprise. But Amy was one of those people where she finally found her niche, found where she fit into this whole scheme of track and field. And the unfortunate part of it was in those days, there weren't that many opportunities to be in the marathon, to run a marathon. It was not a commonly held. Now, today, you know, you have the Omaha, Lincoln, they all both have marathons, and you could find events to run. In those days, you couldn't hardly find one to run. And and, you know, I was ignorant in terms of how to train. I learned a lot with AIM and how to, basically we trained her as a 10K runner, and then she just gutted it out the rest of the way. But that was, that had to be one of a highlight in my coaching career, to see her coming across the finish line. And actually she blew the competition away. We stopped at, this was at Azusa, and they ran an out and back course where they ran out, clear out to an end of a reservoir and then back and retraced the same route. We were out at maybe 20-mile marker, and there were three girls, a girl from northern state in South Dakota, and a girl from North Florida, and Baker, and they're running together. And at about 20 miles, one of the girls decides she's going to take off and tried to break it open. And Amy told her, said, "That's too early, don't go." And she didn't listen to her. And by the time next time we saw him was like at 23, and Amy had made up all the ground, and she was then 300 meters ahead and won by well over 400 meters. Just really bright, and she knew what she was capable of and what the demands of the event were. And she never got outside of her ability level. She was always running within her abilities, and she understood that probably better than most kids do. And it was great for her to win, and it was great for our women to have a national champion and so forth. And then probably Darren Harson was another kid that we had. Was our first running event national champion. Won the 800 meters in '83. So we won the national 800 meter runs in every national meet, odd year national meet, for 83, 85, 87, with Harson and Larson and Larson. But Darren came to us as a pole vaulter from Alma, Nebraska. It was a pretty good one. It was a 15-foot vaulter. But he wasn't very big, and he saw the handwriting on the wall that at his size, he wasn't going to be a 17-foot vaulter. And so he decided to move from the vault to the running events, and we gradually started out as a 400-meter runner and gradually moved him up 600. He was an All-American at 600 yards, and then the 800, 880 then. And he never won a race in the national meet until the final of the 800. He was barely qualified, and they ran, in those days, they ran 3 rounds of the 800. He ran every day. And he got like 3rd in the preliminary round and 4th in the semifinal. And the final was just a wild melee. Everybody was together at the end. And I was standing down at the end of the straightaway and watching him come at me, and I can't find Darren. He's a little bitty squirt. And I go, where the heck is he? And just about that time, the field opened up as they came down, like the parting of the Red Sea. Thing opened up, and here comes this guy in an orange shirt right through the hole and takes the whole thing. And ran 149.8 or 9. And but Darren was a great kid, just a really, he was my assistant coach for a couple of years, and then went on to be the head coach at Blair High School for, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years. But he was really a good person, and he was a good assistant also. Now, these people may not have been all national champions. In fact, some of the better marks, like Wagner's and Hugin's, neither one of them were ever national champion. But their marks were pretty darn good. And but they all had one thing, I think, in common, and that is that they were competitors. They would get after it, and they weren't afraid to put the pedal to the metal. And so I think that one of the things that's important, if you're looking at these marks from the 70s and the 80s, you got to remember that we were running on a cinder track up until 1984. And like Harson, he never even had a chance to run on a all-weather track, except at the national meet. Everybody was running on natural surface tracks, and we had our conference meet, the NIAC meet, at the University of Nebraska, outdoors, because nobody had an indoor track or an outdoor track that was all-weather surface. Everybody was running off cinders or red rock or whatever. And so I think that had, a lot to do with some of the performances. A lot of the kids, we've already talked about Wagner and Hugin and how good their marks were, and the fact that they never won a national championship. We had a lot of kids like that. John Bauman is a member of the NAIA Hall of Fame, and as a thrower, he never won a national championship, but he was thrown against a bunch of internationalists from Azusa Pacific, who were Olympic-level guys, and John was second and third, and that kind of thing in the shot and the disc, but he was just so consistent. I think every year for 4 years, I think he was national place winner in both of the throws, in both indoors and outdoors, and had a high quality. Well, I think Skirman's just, when he was a senior, broke John's records, and Skirman's is a U.S. champion, so they give you some idea as to the level that these guys are competing at. There were some kids at Reagan Tenbensel. Reagan Harson now was a middle distance runner for us, half-miler, and conference meet her senior year, she ran and won the mile, the 600, and the 1,000 triple in the conference meet. And this was against some Midland girls who were really pretty good. They were national champions with those 2-mile relay distance medley kind of thing. And so this wasn't against a bunch of pushovers. And Reagan was a really competitive kid. She was an All-American for us in the 800 outdoors and the 6 indoors. Just a really, really competitive, and you would never have thought it. I mean, if you just visited with her, she's like, Casper Milquetoast, she's very, very calm and collected, and a boy and she would do anything. Wheelock was the same way. What a killer. District NAIA meet, the same one when Baker won her first race up there at Wayne. And Wheels ran a mile, 1,500 meters, and won the 800 meters. And we're scrambling, and we're scrambling for points. And he comes down the track after the 800, and he's not hurt. He is hurting. I mean, this guy, he ran himself out. And he comes down, and he said, well, he knew we had him entered in the 5K. And he said, do you still want me to run that 5K? And I said, yeah, we're scrambling for points. We need to do that. And he said, okay. And he walked over behind a little shed they had there and threw up for about 5 minutes and came back out. And he said, well, I'm ready to go. And he came back and won the 5K. Guy was just a killer. I don't know that there's been, outside of Larson, I think he was probably the most competitive person I know that we've had on our teams. But then there were all kinds of kids like that. Wagner was a very competitive runner. And she's in, the Doane Hall of Fame. But here's another kid that ran, a quality mark, 209. That's a heck of a mark. And I think she got second or third in the national meet. So it was a heck of a field. Just happened that, how that goes. There are years when a given race, given event is going to be really loaded. And there are other years when it's not so tough. And she just happened to hit it in a period of time when there were a ton of pretty good half-milers around. And everybody elected to run it. And which is, during this period, we also were fairly successful at in cross country, and we had particularly our women's team. Well, we won 2 men's and 2 women's championships, conference championships during that period, and I think for our women that was really a breakthrough for us, where we finally started to think of ourselves as, national qualifying type people, and laid the groundwork, I think, for the successes that we had later on in the 90s. This was a period, I think, where the runners really, and to a lesser extent maybe the field people, but this is where we had some really, really heavy-duty runners, particularly 800, 400, 800-mile type guys. And there have been other years when we've had great sprinters, and we currently we're in a cycle where we have great field people. We got Tatum, and you got Woken, and you got whoever else. They basically a field type team, and I think that cycle just, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It just happens. But the 80s were a time when our kids finally saw themselves as national level type people, not just conference level type people, and that we can be successful at the national level. Up before that, in the 70s, we were always pretty much a local conference level kind of thing. We rarely would even go to the national meet in the 70s. In the 60s, gee, I think I took Skinner, Clint Skinner and Dean White to the national meet one year, and that was the only time. Fred Davis never ran in the national outdoor, or through national outdoor. The cross-country team that we had during this period had both Wagner and Baker on it, and they were conference champions. And you had two pretty good runners at that point. And so I think that this is a period where we're finally getting the idea that, hey, maybe we can be successful at the national level, and that the conference isn't the end of what we're going to do. And that's kind of an exciting thing for a coach, to see kids get that idea through their heads that, yeah, hey, maybe I can be a national caliber kind of guy, no matter what. Bush, when he ran that 9:14, he was so far behind at the end of the first 3 laps that I think he was 150, 200 meters behind the leaders. And he's just plugging along, hitting 70-second laps, and pretty soon the rest of the guys start to die on their backsides, and he's coming up, and I think he passed 5 guys in the last water jump. And but he was a lot like Baker. He knew what his limits were, what the parameters of his ability would allow him to do, and he ran within that. And Fritzy was a bright kid, Lincoln Pius graduate, and is an actuary down in Louisville, Kentucky now. But he's a really bright kid, and had a sense of judgment as to what he could do, and he never ran outside of himself, never went over the edge. He always stayed within those parameters, and he could run a good mile, and he ran a mile for us all the time, indoors, and a mile, 2 mile. But for his limits, physiological limits that he had to deal with, and he understood what those were, he got about as much out of himself as anybody could. And those are kind of fun things for a coach to see happen. And the same way with Baker. That was a great win for her, and it was kind of an exciting time, yeah.